feature may contain references to sex, drugs and rock and roll.
Fashioned at a leisured pace, yet plundered swiftly by an alien race, used as barter for naked flesh, hung round harlots' slender necks. The signals of thought we deny, jewels kept secret from a miser's eye, or poured from bottles to atrophy some tortured soul. A mirror hole, an octave that projects in tripartite holiness, an image of the truth that I call to you. Hello again, everybody. Welcome once again to the northeast coast of Northumberland in England, a sunny town called Blythe. And how the hell are you? I hope you've had a good week. I'm not going to do much in the way of news tonight because it's kind of all the same. And everyone else does that anyway. So, you know, what have you been doing this week? And why have you been doing it? And what are you doing here anyway? Have you come to get your head messed up after last week? Hello, everyone in the chat room. I hope you can hear me clearly, and I'm sure someone will let me know if they can't. Tonight, I'm going to witter a bit more about what I talked about last week, going into some pretty far-out places, and I'll try and put it into some kind of context as we go, but I'm trying quite specifically to avoid pinning it down and saying this is what I think and this is what they think or any of that. In fact, I'm trying to do the opposite and cast it into a kind of mythos for the night. Kudos points to anybody who picks up on the sourcing of some of the material tonight, and my plan would be to pull it together next week if I don't actually do that tonight, and I will be doing that tonight, but I'll have to hammer the points home. As ever, nothing here is meant to offend anybody's religious perspectives or any other perspectives. It is meant to shake them up a bit. And I had my son Adam call me this week. Blew me away because he asked me a question. This is something he doesn't tend to do in these subjects anyway. He said, hey, I was watching Richard Dawkins in a debate, and he thought it was fantastic, and he was asking questions about it. So I said, well, you need to see Rupert Sheldrake's stuff and just go up, go explore. But it did start me thinking because after last week, of course, I did have in mind touching on not only the origins of life, but a little bit more than that as well this week. So I'll be looking at things, dropping a few names in. Music tonight is, well, it's just cool. That's how I see it. There's some great stuff. And I'll kind of tell you about them as we go on. So there's no theme, except they're great. And I'll save my 70s theme night for another time when I can put my flares on. And to answer a question I was asked earlier, will I be wearing my cape tonight? Well, can you hear it swoosh? There you go. That wasn't my cape. But, yeah, so for the 70s night, if you've got any more suggestions as to what tracks I could use for that, I've just put it on hold for the minute, but I've got Gary Glitter and Cliff Richard and Rolf Harris so far, so you can probably see the theme that's developing there. Do let me know. I'll shut up now because I want to play something for 3 or 4 minutes. 60 Symbols, you will find this on, which is a site on YouTube. Very good site, go look. But I've taken excerpts from just to try and make a point, and I've called this how to confuse a scientist, or what confuses a scientist. And it's with reference also not only to the heavy stuff we'll be touching on, but also Professor Brian Cox, who kind of caused a disturbance in the community, the science community.
Interesting shit on Pierrots and fools.
Is there a part of physics and astronomy that really confuses you?
Yeah, lots of parts of physics and astronomy really confuse me.
Quite a lot of it, actually. Certainly classic things like quantum physics. Very few people have any kind of intuitive understanding of it, and I certainly wouldn't count myself as one of them.
Yeah, how did the universe begin? I mean, what happened before the Big Bang? We can describe very detailed results of it and make predictions, but what initiated it? No idea, no way to figure it out.
There's been a bit of a reaction to a lecture Brian gave, which he had the courage and then the ability to explain quantum mechanics quite like he did to the general public, and it got quite technical at times.
I didn't watch it at the time, no, but since then I've become aware that it's all kicked off, basically.
It seems to me to have caused two reactions, one amongst the physicists, that's at a more technical level, and then one amongst a group of people who have jumped on some words that he used.
Some guys were posting, scientists were posting, blogs on blogs were saying, this isn't right. Brian Cox himself was then responding to these blogs. It was all kicking off on Twitter. He was talking about how everything in the universe, when you're dealing with quantum mechanics, how things are connected. And in particular, he was talking about electrons and the energy associated with electrons. And there's been this sort of to and fro, and some of it quite nasty, on Twitter, on blogs, discussing the rights and wrongs of what Brian said.
Because they can't be in the same quantum state, therefore, if you move one electron up, or a group of electrons, and change their energy, then the whole system throughout the universe will change as well.
It's not quite right what he said, no, but the spirit of what he said is okay.
So other people have drawn the implications of it. They have inferred from it that the fact that we're all connected in our consciousness is all connected, because when you change energy levels in one group, it immediately affects the energy levels in another group, and that link is real.
So everything is connected to everything else.
Because in quantum mechanics, you can't precisely say where something is at any given, or where it is and what its velocity is or momentum is. There's an uncertainty. So you describe things in terms of wave functions, which give you what are known as the probability of finding things. But these wave functions can spread, and the interconnectedness is simply the fact that all of the electrons, the wave function describing all of them, is spread across the universe. That's what quantum mechanics can do for you, that classical mechanics can't. It can describe all of the particles with one wave function. That's what the idea is. And so it's not surprising to me that if you alter the state of an electron over here, and that it's going to have a knock-on effect somewhere else.
Where all this comes from is the Pauli exclusion principle. So this is basically the idea that no two fermions, and electrons are fermions, can occupy the same quantum state. Okay, now I said something slightly different there to what Brian said. He said energy levels, because you could maybe associate an energy level with one particular quantum number, but it doesn't necessarily describe the whole quantum state of that electron.
So there you have it. Scientists being boring and actually being confused, as you are and as I am. And I think the point I'm making here is, in the times that I've met scientists in various different fields, they're not as they are tarnished to be. They're just people like you and me who have a particular interest in a particular, very specific field usually. As to the rest of it and how it all fits into a bigger picture, well, they're actually more clueless in many respects than people like you and me who are generally interested and go to look. But in view of Darwin being mentioned this week, this is a subject that doesn't often rile people nowadays, because it's this age-old debate of Darwin against the church. I find a truth movement that's virtually been brainwashed into believing that Darwin is all... I'm talking about his theory of evolution. that that's all made up and nonsense and so on, but that's all that the church ever wanted people to believe. A lot of people believe that no missing links have ever been found, etc., etc. Well, that's just, it's not the case. And to turn down Darwinism or to overlook it, you have to overlook DNA. And that's kind of where it all starts coming together. I have found, as I mentioned in previous shows, those who knock Darwin tend not to have read his damn books anyway, or book, and kind of miss the point as to what he did and didn't say. There's an awful lot of rubbish out there. So make your own minds up. But in 1859, when he published On the Origin of Species, he dedicated an entire chapter to the problem of missing intermediate links, these transitional forms that bridge evolutionary gaps between the closely related species. If his theory was correct, the fossil record should be full of them, but where are they? At the time, it was a real problem, as few such fossils had been found. But then came, in 1861, Archaeopteryx, with the wings and feathers of a bird and the teeth and tail of a dinosaur. And since then, they've discovered a multitude of intermediate links, according to their belief. Fish that could crawl, lizards with mammal-like jaws, whales with legs, giraffes with short necks, and many others. But there's one that we're unlikely ever to find, and that's the link between the earliest proto-life and life as we know it, which is also known as the last universal common ancestor, or LUCA. So this LUCA lived around 4 billion years ago, a tiny life form that's the direct ancestor of every single living thing, from aardvarks to zebras, according to current theories. It wasn't the very first life. Thousands, if not millions of years of evolutionary experimentation preceded it. But understanding LUCA would give us the best view of the origin of life. We already know quite a bit. And I always like to go and look at what is known. I certainly don't believe it. I just want to know what is known in each field. Although traces of LUCA, or any traces of LUCA left in rocks, were probably obliterated eons ago, there's something far more revealing inside today's living cells, a biological operating system that's common to all life and must have been shared by LUCA too. So many features of LUCA have remained paradoxical, but new work on a leading hypothesis for the origin of life might have solved many of the mysteries, or again it might not. But as ever, we're getting a more detailed picture, and it's one that you can't ignore or just deny. It has to be taken into the perspective if you truly are interested in knowledge nowadays. And if you're not, great, but that's kind of what this program's about. Darwin himself was among the first scientists to speculate on how life originated, and he envisaged a warm little pond with all sorts of ammonia, etc., phosphoric acid, salts, and light, heat, and electricity, of course. Keep focusing on the electricity. We'll probably never know exactly how LUCA came to be, but scientists can make an educated guess by looking at the features of today's living systems. And these tell quite a bit about what it was like. We know it used DNA to store recipes for proteins, for instance. We even know what many of those recipes were, because many vital proteins found in all cells today must have come from LUCA. And from the nature of these proteins, it's clear that LUCA used an energy-rich molecule called ATP to fuel cellular processes, just as our cells do. So how did LUCA make its ATP is the question that scientists face. Anyone designing life from scratch would probably make ATP using chemical reactions inside the cell, but that's not how it's done. Instead, energy from food or sunlight is used to power a protein pump that shunts hydrogen ions, literally protons, out of the cell. And this creates a difference in the proton concentration, or a gradient across the cell membrane. Protons will then flow back into the cell through another protein embedded in that membrane, which uses the energy to produce ATP. Now, to understand this, think of it really as a kitchen sink, a double kitchen sink. And the small sink would represent the inside of the cell and the large one, the outside world. So you start by filling the large sink with water, leaving the small one empty. And the difference in water levels is a potential source of energy. Drill a hole in the divider and the water will flow into the small sink. The flow could be used to drive a tiny turbine, which is essentially what the ATP protein, or the ATP making protein is. It's a turbine turned by protons and other positive ions. And this process is so convoluted that when it was discovered by biochemist Peter Mitchell in 1961, it was dismissed as nonsense. But it's turned out to be common to all life, so most biologists think it must be how Luca made ATP. Exploiting a proton gradient requires a membrane that is impermeable to protons. They should only be able to flow in through the turbine, so it is assumed that Luca had an impermeable membrane. This is the first cellular life. But there's no evidence that it is the case. In fact, Luca's membrane is an enigma. And to understand why, we go back to the 70s, when it was thought that life could be divided into the two great empires. In one were animals, plants and fungi, and in the other, simpler bacteria. This is the rubbish they taught me at school. Then microbiologist Carl Weiss discovered that bacterial empire actually contained two radically different kinds of life. So a third domain now, known as archaea, has been hiding in plain sight. And archaea often look like bacteria and are similar in many ways as you'd expect, given they both evolved from Luca, probably quite soon after it existed. And there's also some fundamental differences between them. And one of them is their membranes. Right, I'll just kind of play some music now, I think, rather than go on, and then I'll pick up afterwards. But what we're looking at here actually is a protein that got the first life evolving, and it's actually a turbine. If you remember, I was talking last week about how I was amazed as a kid that nuclear energy is used just to heat a kettle, to create steam, to drive a turbine. We have an electric universe, or so it's been discovered in the last 15 years in particular, and look at it. It's all electricity, pumps, turbines. Last week I talked about the expanding Earth. That's steam-driven. This is not so profound. This is what we see. This can't actually be denied. This is what science is uncovering. And I would propose that if you look at it logically, you'll come to another understanding. Because I'll be looking later in the program at other aspects of the source of life on Earth. But for now, I'm going to start playing some cool music. I'm sure you'll recognize them. The first one is Hazel O'Connor.
I
Another life-creating event has been taking place when MPs recently took a U-turn to vote in favour of a bill that will turn the pub industry on its head. Wow, there's a left turn for you. I just wanted to mention it because this means that, in essence, publicans renting pubs from large pub companies will be able to opt out of the beer tie. That's a business model under which they often pay a cheaper rent, but they have to buy their beer from the landlords, and often at ridiculously high prices. It's one thing that destroyed the ale industry in many respects in this country, and that is really fighting back now, so I just hope that happens. It was the pubs in this country where everything good started. I don't mean the drunk and puking on the streets. And they've been attacked and destroyed, and the knock-on from that is to affect music and musicians and artists who have traditionally always played in these places, to the point where they have to play in them for nothing, etc. And people feed themselves doing this. And it's on the back of pub companies. And there's a good case to argue that that's not the case as well, but it's one I'm pretty well decided on. So there you go. So I'm talking about protein pumps and profound stuff like that. Why? Well, if you can imagine that there was this cell which kind of bridges the two environments, is what I guess I'm trying to say, straddling seawater and vent fluids. This is in the ancient seas. Then it exploits the proton gradient through a leaky membrane, and this would allow the protons to flow from the seawater through the cell and back out into the vent fluid without the gradient collapsing. That's the principle here. As long as some of the incoming protons pass through the ATP turbines, the cells have energy from those turbines, and simple membranes made of fat molecules have just the required properties. In fact, fats spontaneously form cell-like structure that can grow and divide as more molecules are added. But these properties mean they have long been of interest to those exploring the origins of life. But the assumption was always that leak-proof membranes had to evolve before cells could exploit these protein gradients. It would appear that this is wrong. And it was sketched out by two scientists called Lane and Martin in 2012. And they've been working on that more, and it's quite interesting. They've come up with a solution for this problem with the membrane, and the obvious solution is for it to evolve to be less leaky. But this doesn't work either, because it would have stopped protons flowing through, and it would shut off the energy. So, is there a way out? Well, they've discovered that modern cells have a third kind of protein in their membranes, and these act like a revolving door, literally, swapping one ion for another across the membrane, a sodium ion for a proton, say, and they don't use any energy. A revolving door like this kind of solves that leaky membrane conundrum that the scientists have had, because if early cells evolved a revolving door that exchanged sodium ions for protons, then the game suddenly changes. Sodium ions can't pass through leaky lipid membranes nearly as easily as protons. So you have this system whereby sodium ions can re-enter the cell through the ATP turbine protein. So a cell with one of these swinging door, revolving door exchangers also, if you think about it, is little other than a supercharged turbo. And this turbine generates 60% more because of the revolving door supercharger. Isn't that amazing? These are the words I'm using, by the way. Supercharge and turbo, but the mechanisms are the same. So I just kind of wanted to point that out, because life has these mechanisms, and we use them to drive everything that we kind of drive today anyway. That's the point, and that's the perspective I want to get over on that. So hopefully it won't be quite as dull on the next sections, but hey, you never know. I'm going to play something now. Oh, this is so cool. Not tell me what this was. Anyway, again, more kudos points for people who know what this was.
This is Patrick Stewart. How are you liking the program so far?
There's a wind blowing across the land. Common folk are joining hands. They've heard the call. They've seen the light. Now they're ready for the fight. There's a rebel army that's come from every side. There's a rebel army singing, let the people decide. There's a rebel army, hear their battle cry. There's a rebel army singing, let the people decide. Let the people decide.
So, talking about stuff, scientific stuff, again, I'm doing this because I do find that, I'm no scientific genius. I'm not trying to put that over, but when talking to truth seekers or whatever, science tends to get condemned. So it's like poo-pooed, oops, don't need to know that. The scientists are saying it, so it must be false. And that is so the wrong perspective. That is so the perspective that your enemy wants you to have for pretty obvious reasons. So all I'm doing tonight is highlighting subject areas that I would suggest people might want to look into, and I'm leaving the links between them pretty vague, because it will dawn on some, and if it doesn't dawn on you, it's because the little gaps haven't been filled out for you, and no doubt your own researchers and so on would do that. So that's why I'm doing it. So I've looked at one of the potential sources of life, and that's down to proton gradients. And another thing that is at the depths of science, is their biggest thing, is the monopole. Now, they don't know whether a magnetic monopole exists or not, but they suspect it has to, for reasons I'll go into. And yet they can't find one. So what is a monopole? Well, again, this is from the perspective of those who are looking at the electric universe models and so on. If you've not really got any insight into electricity and so on, great, you don't really need it. And I'm never looking to get complex with this stuff. That's my point, actually, is it doesn't have to be. So do listen to the podcast afterwards to the stuff I just said before, and see if you can follow this through. Because it is quite heavy, but it needs to be got out the way. So, a magnetic monopole is a magnetic north pole without its accompanying south pole, or a south one without its north. And no one has ever seen one. If our present understanding of particles and forces is correct, we don't have the remotest chance of finding one. Now, there's a scientist called Pinfold at University of Alberta in Edmonton, and he begs to differ. He says that I'd give us about the same chance of finding a monopole as we would have given of finding the Higgs boson 10 years ago. Now, he's obviously saying this as a confident gesture, but I'm not so convinced that they found the Higgs boson or that it is what they suspect it is. And neither are they, if you go and listen to what the scientists say. However, magnetic monopoles have been a no-show, and it's been a bugbear for physicists that like to see truth in the beauty of the mathematical formula. And among the most famous of these is James Clerk Maxwell, who I've referred to many times throughout these shows. They encapsulate the idea that electricity and magnetism are two manifestations of the same thing, the fundamental force of electromagnetism. Maxwell's equations predicted the existence of individual freely moving even electric charges, things that nature supplies in abundance in the form of particles like electrons and protons. And to achieve an aesthetically pleasing symmetry in the equation, similar freewheeling magnetic charges had to exist as well. But this was less obvious because north and south magnetic poles that attract and repel do exist, just as positive and negative electric charges do. But from the humblest bar magnet to the Earth's dynamo, magnetic poles only ever crop up tied together in pairs. You chop a magnet in half and it's a bit like Walt Disney's Sorcerer's Apprentice, that magic broom. You get two completely new magnets or broom handles. So it's a fact of nature, and Maxwell realized that and wrote it out of his equations. However, they have made a comeback thanks to Paul Dirac, famous British theorist who was very word-shy, or was, and he was obsessed with mathematical beauty. And quantum theory was all the rage in 1931 when Dirac began applying its ideas to Maxwell's classical electromagnetism. His calculations showed that even if there was just one magnetic monopole in the entire universe, its existence would explain why all of the electric charge we see comes in the same bite-sized chunks of +1 or -1. And this time the idea struck. So this is about the quantization of the electric charge, something which has been noted and proven and is not questioned. What is it, though, is another thing altogether. 40 years on, physicists discovered that the electromagnetic force and the weak nuclear force that controls radioactive decay could just be rolled into one, and they were seeking ways to unify this force with the strong nuclear force. Without monopoles, you would have to expect electrically charged particles to have all sorts of charges, say the scientists. So there you go, just the concept of a magnetic monopole, a north or a south pole of a magnet existing in its own right. Scientists conclude that just one maybe, has to, because if it does, it would explain observations, and it does fit in with quantum theory, because quantum theory loves everything to be quantized. So there, a little bit of heavy stuff. Go and look at those subjects for yourself, and I won't witter any more about them tonight. We'll get on to some more interesting stuff, I hope. I played Hazel O'Connor before. That, of course, was 8th Day. I loved that song when it came out. And that was the People's Army after that, prior to the donations. The People's Army for, God, what was it called? I can't even remember now. Flipping out. The Referendum Party, that's it, back in 1997. And they had to put together a campaign tune, and yep, that was it. Diabolical, don't you think? But there you go. I couldn't resist playing it because it always amused me. More music. How's about What's Up?
25 years down, my life is still trying to get up that great big hill of hope for a destination. I realized quickly when I knew I should that the world was made up of this brotherhood of man, or whatever that means. Into a crisis times when I'm lying in bed just to get it all out what's in my head, and I am feeling a little peculiar. And so I wake in the morning and I step outside and I take a deep breath and I get real high and I scream from the top of my lungs, years and my life is still trying to get us that great big fuel of hope for a destination.
Four non-blondes. That sounds a bit like a revelatory moment at a gangbang. That one was called What's Up. Brilliant, bloody song. Love that. And I'll be playing one soon that's actually one of my favourite songs of all time, but it took me a few years to kind of discover it. I'll bitter about that then. So, let me tell you a story, yeah? Now, there'll be perhaps names drop into this that will mean nothing to you, and nor should they. That's the point I'm making. So, if you can draw connections between some of the stuff I'm saying and real stuff, real places and real names, then do so. But these are just the names used in, well, various works that I will talk about at the end, but I'm doing this for a reason, leaving it a little bit mysterious at the moment for anyone who hasn't stumbled across this. The work of Richard Hoagland, if you're interested in that, this is the guy from Enterprise Mission. Do go look enterprisemission.com, who for many years has been exposing the NASA cover-up, the whistleblowers from NASA, showing structures across the solar system, and so on and so forth. A fascinating story, one which I've always found has divided the truth community. Some think it's a front, and others, like a psyop, and others think, well, no, it's real. And the point is, not a lot of it can be proven. That's the way to look at it. But there's another way of looking at it, and you'll find an awful lot tonight that is actually the basis of the Tetrahedral Physics that he so details in his work. So do go and look at Richard Hoagland if you haven't. So let's call these people Essenes. Okay. Simply because it has a resonance. And they were thinking of leaving their planet, which is called Altair, to find a completely unknown planet on which to live permanently. A planet which would, in turn, serve as a base for their future voluntary preparatory work designed to ensure redemption of the galaxy. And since they would be cutting themselves off from Altair, they had to take everyone and everything they would need with them, and prepare to do so in a totally secret manner. It could not be just a few Essenes either. They had to carefully recruit a vast number. The four knew well of the potential for genetic collapse. This is four persons referred to in the text, irrelevant for now. The four knew well of the potential for genetic collapse faced by the intergalactic pioneers of old, and they knew that Essenes would face the same problem. Additionally, they knew Essenes would not meet up with beings with whom they could intermingle, so they had to have a large enough gene pool to be able to survive indefinitely. Their leaders therefore consulted mathematicians, geneticists, to calculate precisely the minimum number of Essenes required for their genetic survival on the journey from Altair. And this took into account a myriad of factors, including many variables of the gene pool with which they started. And the final result was a minimum of 2/3 The challenge, of course, was an incredible one. The essence of the plan called for nearly all active recruiting to be carried out at various academia by means of the direct recruitment of those students and teachers thought to be favourably inclined towards the Essene movement. Those of this grouping who became members would then informally discuss the Essene concept in general terms with their associates and friends. Those considered to be very interested would then be contacted by Essene members who would carry through the recruitment to either success or failure. The interpersonal network of students and teachers spread throughout Altaean society, but always secretly. Often business partners, friends, and even relatives didn't know that their partners, friends, and relatives were Essenes until they met at a local meeting. They were very careful, however, not to drain away too many of the academia's students and teachers, or to disrupt the institution, or company by taking away too many of its employees or directors. Often, hard decisions had to be made, even after membership, so many Essenes had to remain behind to ensure that businesses could continue to function and provide employment, essential goods and services. So it's talking about meetings they had. It says, although meetings for such a purpose had been unprecedented, intergalactic migrations did indeed have precedent. History told them that massive migrations had always carried forward beings from one galaxy to the next, usually along the chain of galaxies which led to their current galaxy. However, this usually followed the redeeming of their galaxy, the fulfilling of the galactic experience, so that all beings of any given galaxy had the opportunity to live in harmony. The Humerian Kabbalists from the planet of Huma were extremely disappointed that their departure was not associated with the redeeming of their galaxy, but was precipitated by the need to escape. This redeeming of the galaxy was historical imperative under which the galaxy had been developed, but in this case it was not to be, as the Kabbalists had historical records stating that this had happened several times before. They weren't totally downcast when they started preparing their escape. They deduced that fundamental conditions and situations sometimes recur, enabling those aware of their history to take advantage of that knowledge and act accordingly. The fact that they were able to keep their vast project totally secret from outsiders surprised and uplifted them and made them feel they were doing the right thing. Even so, they knew that the reasons for this success were threefold. They were dedicated, they planned well, and they worked hard. And it does dawn upon me, I'd mark that because it's a link to a track I want to play later. But there you go. So that section was about history repeating itself. Only a few hours after the departure of the Essenes, though, in their 1,000 ships bound for a new life of voluntary service to the galaxy, other Alteans began to realize that some of their co-workers, family members, friends and neighbors were failing to appear for their everyday business and social engagements, and worried reports in the thousands were beginning to be received around the planet by various local and legal authorities, when all planetary broadcasting was temporarily disrupted by the Essenes, who sent a single, lengthy transcommunication back to Altea from their flotilla. Essenes wanted everyone to know immediately and directly from them what had transpired, and what the Essenes were doing, and what they hoped to accomplish. The leader of the Essenes spoke, in turn assuring Alteans that Essenes were leaving Altea to assume their roles as preparers of the galaxy, not because they'd lost hope for Altea, or because they didn't love their planet, but because the time had arrived when the long ago conceived imperative of the Essene movement demanded that they take bold and resolute action. Essenes apologized for the secrecy of their preparation and outward voyage, but explained that they had concluded, even before departure preparations were begun, that secrecy was in the best interests of all. It not only precluded the possibility of a negative reaction to the Essenes, but it also, they hoped, ensured a minimum disruption to Altean society before, during, and after the departure. There was apparently much grieving throughout Altean society, but even more grieving accompanied the private viewing of the many personal messages by friends and relatives of those who had departed. Alteans everywhere were deeply shocked. Many resented the secrecy with which the Essenes had accomplished the goal of leaving Altea, and others were horrified that such a massive, though benevolent, undertaking could have been conceived and executed without anyone suspecting. Families cried out in agony at the loss of loved ones, as much lost to them as if they had died. And despite their efforts, the Essenes had underestimated the breadth and the depth of feelings unleashed by their sudden and irrevocable departure. A malaise continued to hang over Altea for months as the full import and impact of the event sank into the mind of the people, and they began to doubt everything, but mostly themselves, and for the first time as a culture started to come to full grips with the possible ramifications of galactic colonization. Not only from the standpoint of those dire warnings issued by Essenes about possible confrontations and conflicts, but from the sheer magnitude of the extensive operation that would be required to plan, outfit, and send expeditions far from Altean space. And during their first billion years of development, Alteans had reached beyond Altea to a dozen relatively nearby planets using the technology brought by the intergalactic pioneers. These they had colonized, but only through great effort and expense. There were simply very few planets in the vicinity. Most stars are really multi-star systems and therefore produce constantly varying gravitational fields around themselves. Very few planets can exist under such conditions. It's only at the center of the galaxy, where stars are relatively close together, that there are also more than a few planets. And to be able to colonize extensively, Alteans had to journey to the center of the galaxy. End of part 1. So I'll delve a bit more into that little tale afterwards. But have you ever wondered what would happen if the sun were to disappear? Well, listen.
Interesting shit. On Pierrots and Fools.
Hey, Vsauce, Michael here. Gravity is a property of matter. Anything with mass. This includes the moon, Earth, Jupiter, the sun, and even you, your body. In fact, if you kind of like somebody, have them stand 3/4 of a millimeter away from you. At that distance, cumulatively, every atom in your body and every atom in their body will draw you two together with the same gravitational force that the sun is exerting on you right now. Of course, we don't feel either of those forces because compared to the gravitational influence of the Earth, they are basically nothing. You don't need to concern yourself with the gravitational attraction between you and someone you're hugging, or your individual body and the sun 150 million kilometers away. In fact, the sun may as well not exist. What if the sun disappeared? Well, to be sure, it's not going to happen. The sun will die billions of years from now by expanding, boiling off our oceans, and swallowing the Earth whole. The sun is not going to simply disappear. Matter and energy don't vanish. Of course, matter can quantum tunnel to different locations, but on the scale of the sun, there is not enough time in the lifetime of millions and billions of universes for such a probability to even be worth discussing. But let's discuss it anyway, as a thought experiment, to determine how the Earth would get along with no sun. What will the Earth do and what can it do alone? At the exact moment that the sun disappeared, we would have no idea, because it takes light from the sun 8 minutes and 20 seconds to reach Earth. So for a little over 8 minutes after the sun disappeared, we would have no idea. Once we did, confusion and mass panic would most likely ensue. The sun's gravitational grasp on our planet would also take 8 minutes and 20 seconds to end. This is because gravity waves propagate at the speed of light. So, the very moment we saw our sun disappear, we would also lose its gravitational influence, and Earth would fly out in a straight line tangent to wherever it was in its orbit. The finite speed of light and gravity mean that as panic and fear spread across the Earth at the loss of our sun, we could still, for a while, look up into the sky and see our planetary buddies further out, continuing to operate as if nothing had happened. For instance, Jupiter would continue orbiting and reflecting light from a sun that no longer existed for about 30 minutes after Earth already knew the sun was gone. And depending on where Jupiter was in its orbit, it would take another 30 minutes to an hour for us to watch the reflected light of Jupiter snuff out. With no moonlight or sunlight, the universe itself would be our only source of visible light from space. In 2004, Abdul Ahad calculated that the Milky Way contributes about as much light as 1/300th of a full moon. there would be enough light from space for us to see around a bit. But of course, electricity and fossil fuels would still be usable for a while, so cities and towns could continue to be lit by man-made sources, just like a typical night. Except it would be night everywhere. Photosynthesis would stop immediately, and this is huge. I had a great discussion about this video with Henry from Minute Physics and the new channel, Minute Earth. If you're not subscribed to Minute Earth, you definitely should be. In one of his episodes there, he mentions that 99.9% of the natural productivity on Earth is done by photosynthesis, which requires the sun. Without the sun, plants would no longer be able to inhale carbon dioxide and exhale life-sustaining oxygen. But don't worry. Collectively, all of us humans, all 7 billion of us, breathe in about 6 trillion kilos of oxygen every year. But our atmosphere contains a whopping quintillion kilos of oxygen. So even without photosynthesis, and including all of the other animals and insects and microorganisms that consume oxygen, it would take us thousands of years to run out. The poor plants themselves would be much worse off. Without the sun, most of them would die within days or weeks. Except for large plants. Giant trees, for instance, contain enough sugar for energy that they could technically live in the dark for years. Their problem is going to be that the Earth will get quite cold. In fact, mighty trees would freeze to death, their blood, the water and sap inside them solidifying, way before they died of starvation.
Critical Mass Radio. Well, there you go. That was a very interesting thing from Vsauce about what happens if the sun were to disappear. And do listen to the second part of this, which will be coming up. It kind of nails something that is fascinating, because we certainly all used to think it would be the end of everything. Do listen on. So, just continuing with the story for now, planets have to be of a certain composition and relatively small. Giant planets consisting mostly of gases are totally unacceptable. The inner rocky planets of star systems are the only likely targets for colonization. And preparation of these rocky planets includes many things, but most importantly, the adjustment of each individual planet's speed of rotation, so that it turns on its axis once every 23 hours and 56 minutes, no matter what its diameter. This period of rotation is absolutely vital because it results in just the right magnetic field for a planet, just the right magnetic field to carry with it planetary consciousness energy, long since called planetary Tauron. This planetary Tauron is also produced in exactly the right amount by means of a rotational period of 23 hours, 56 minutes. Alteans also knew from information brought from previous galaxies that no self-aware being can exist for long without living on a planet across which flows the proper amount of planetary Tauron, as this allows 4-dimensional souls to survive within a 3-dimensional being and environment. Planetary rotation speeds could only be increased by Altean technology, so planets spinning too rapidly, as well as planets without large amounts of water, were simply uninhabitable. To accomplish the tasks of increasing planetary spin rates, graviton infusion complexes contain 2 very large spinning disks, and they're constructed on planetary surfaces at 2 widely separated sites, predicted by the geography of the particular planet and by the trans-dimensional physics known to Alteans. These spinning disks, accompanied by their attendant graviton capture rings, the particles of gravity waves have long since been known as gravitons, increase the effective mass of their planets near their surface through a process of continuous bombardment and infusion of gravitons. The result obtained by carefully planned and continued processes are planets which turn on their axis once every 23 hours and 56 minutes. Next comes the project of infusing usually very thin natural atmospheres of planets being prepared for habitation with a mixture of gases. Enormous amounts of nitrogen and other gases in supercooled and compressed to liquid form are transported from an already inhabited planet, where the gases have been extracted or manufactured. These gases are then released into the existing natural atmosphere of planets being prepared and are kept from drifting away from the planet by the planet's gravity, which is now stronger due to the massive infusion of gravitons. Finally, oxygen joins the combined atmosphere, following its separation from water on the planet being prepared. Planets are given combined atmospheres with a density and resulting thickness which enables the suns of those planets to heat their atmospheres to comfortable temperatures. The procedures for graviton infusion, rotation rate increasing, combined atmosphere making and subsequent warming had long been since worked out in previous galaxies. So Altaians knew before embarking on a planetary adjustment project that the planet in question could meet the several parameters necessary to qualify. That reduced even further the number of planetary candidates for colonization. Qualifying planets, therefore, only required massive amounts of money and effort, not new scientific inventions. The process of rotation and atmosphere adjustment takes from 5 to 10 years, during which time the workers have to live indoors in controlled temperature and atmosphere environments, just as those traveling in space vessels do. Once these adjustments are completed, the real work of planetary development begins. Considering the expense, logistics, manpower, and dedication involved, several hundred years of work are required to fully colonize a planet. Chelsea lovers, Dave Stewart, what can I say?
When he found her, he stayed down there with his velvet heels and a purple hair, in a room so dark they could barely crawl, with orange posters on Victorian walls. It was Saturday night and he felt like death. She just wanted to be loved like anybody else. Saturday night and the clock never stopped. She felt like a loser on top of the pop. The Chelsea lovers with guillotine lips, mascara egos, doing a magazine strip. The Chelsea lovers in a vicious town with lipstick features, like a couple of clowns. Strange creatures in the eider down, teenage oblivion waiting to be crowned. Holes in the mattress where these beasts had lain, awake until morning with ice in their veins, facing each other, their eyes never met. He just wanted to be straight, it never happened to him yet. Both of them laughing, but they can't understand what it is about friendship makes you hold your own hand. The Chelsea lovers, oh how they can talk with their tongues connected and their skin like chalk. The Chelsea lovers, they're joined at
Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics fame. Awesome Chelsea Lovers from his incredible album, and it is. I loved it, but I didn't discover it until years later. Greetings from the Gutter. Do go and listen to that. I love that stuff. The guy's a genius. He does different music, all sorts of stuff. So I've told you a little story so far about the Alteans leaving their planet and moving on and looking to construct something. They have a philosophy behind what they're doing as well, which will become clearer and clearer as this unfolds. So during the first billion years of their development, apparently these Alteans reached beyond Altea to a dozen relatively nearby planets, as I said. And preparation of these planets included getting the rotational spin to the required speed. What eventually resulted through a series of decisions made about a year after the departure of the Essene expedition was not the clear mandate envisaged by the Over-Council that partially funded procedures to begin a very downscaled Altean naval service, a navy which was designed to make a few tentative explorations to see if more were feasible. Altea therefore embarked on a very conservative go slow, look and see policy, resulting in a series of convulsive steps which nonetheless crept towards the ultimate goal. And the naval service which began with such fanfare, was reduced to only a pair of starships for hundreds of years, following an initial disappointing exploration, then revived again when interest was regenerated by a private expedition, finding a planet rich in various ores along the way towards the heart of the galaxy. And this pattern was repeated many times, and each time new discoveries and slight advances were made. A full 260 million years passed by before this naval service had finally been allowed to grow to sufficient size and capability to accomplish those things previously dreamed of. It does say previously those things, the far-sighted Over-Council of Altea, 260 million years before, had sought to accomplish. So, huge tracts of time. The results of the new Altean Naval Service had shown that colonization was feasible, and new discussions progressed. And this, as I say, was some 690 million years ago. Essenes eventually settled underground in an otherwise uninhabitable planet, but this suited their purpose entirely, since they wanted to work by themselves and in total secrecy. Following the collapse of the Altean effort to colonize the center of the galaxy, they determined that the time for major preparation was at hand. Secretly, they had followed every event of importance which had occurred in the galaxy for over 250 million years. Essenes were therefore intimately familiar with Altean society and thinking, concluding that for Alteans to eventually carry out their mandate of redeeming the galaxy, Altean society would require considerable assistance in order to reverse its state of continuing deterioration. Essenes knew that they themselves were only preparers and not redeemers, and they observed Altean society for millions more years before finally concluding that due to Altea's long slide toward losing its societal courage, to society's ability to take decisive action and counter to prevailing doctrine or current events, it would never be able to take those resolute steps necessary to counter either current or future events. Essenes therefore concluded that what was needed was a partner society for Altean society, a society composed of courageous, free-willed, self-aware beings who could provide the Alteans with guiding assistance. Essenes knew that no such courageous, free-willed, self-aware beings currently existed or would exist under current or projected conditions in the galaxy. Therefore, a qualifying planet needed to be found and prepared in such a way that natural evolution would eventually bring about such a being. This was the specific mandate that Essenes had always sought. Explorations by Essenes discovered a planet which was nearly the same size as Altea, and which contained vast amounts of water, mostly in gigantic oceans which covered most of its surface. Primitive sea life existed in those oceans, but Essenes knew that there was not the slightest possibility that evolutionary processes would continue much farther on this planet without major adjustments to the planetary environment. Essenes concluded that the way to effect major adjustments to the environment of this planet was through working on the three most important planetary motions in space: rotation, revolution, and retrograde precession. The Essenes knew that they could bring about these desired changes through the introduction of a moon whose mass and resulting gravity could be used to alter the planet's period of rotation and revolution, and most importantly to induce the required retrograde precessional period of 25,920 years. They were in the process of finding a suitable moon for the planet they would be preparing when one of their extragalactic ships received a distress call from a very distant source. Beings on a dying planet were desperately seeking aid. The Essene ship diverted immediately in order to render assistance, but arrived at the planet too late to save its beings. As a result of internal pressures in a weak crust, the planet had suddenly burst open along a long fissure, allowing molten rock to flow freely across much of its surface. The resulting release of poisonous gases so polluted the atmosphere that those beings not killed by fire were asphyxiated. The Essenes watched in great sorrow for some time as this planet convulsed again and again before the fissure collapsed into itself, quelling the fires. As part of this standard Essene procedure, aboard ship sensors were directed at the dying planet, and Essenes thereby determined that its mass and size made it a suitable candidate to become the projected moon of the planet they were about to prepare. The leadership discussed the appropriateness of using this now dead planet for the project, and decided to proceed as they concluded that the dead planet could become a reminder to those who came later of those who had gone before, in the endless repetition of birth, life, death, and rebirth. The formerly dead planet, become moon, was brought into orbit around the planet of preparation some 572 million years ago. Its crust had been completely transformed and pockmarked by numerous craters of varying size in order to appear as if it really were the natural satellite of the planet of preparation. The rotation rate of the new moon was synchronized with its period of revolution, so that only one hemisphere would ever face the planet of preparation. The side visible from the planet of preparation was much more heavily cratered, a total contradiction to the natural occurrence, had the craters been the result of bombardment from huge chunks of material flying through the solar system that might have impacted. Space material would much more likely strike either the side facing away from the planet, or, if those potentially devastating meteorites had passed between the planet and the moon, the stronger gravitational pull of the planet would have attracted them. Only hints of the former dead planet's previous existence remain, among them the presence of isotopes near its surface which could not possibly have entered as a result of radiation from the sun of the planet of preparation. The dead planet's sun was an older star which had produced these isotopes due to countless eons of nuclear fusion. The much younger sun of the planet of preparation would not be capable of emitting such isotopes until far into the future, when its own processes of nuclear fusion would have had time to construct such isotopes. By far the most important adjustment, though, was made to the planet of preparation, and this was the creation of retrograde precessional period of 25,920 years. This period of precession, which produced a very slow off-center rotation of the surface of the planet, was absolutely necessary to provide the proper environment for natural evolution to bring about self-aware life. In a relatively short time, the evolutionary process began on the planet, and there ensued a literal explosion of life, first in the great oceans and later on the emerging land masses. Essenes observed this process unfolding for hundreds of millions of years from an underground water base on the planet of preparation, a base from which they kept the planet of preparation's moon in the orbit that ensured the maintenance of the planet of preparation's all-important 25,920-year retrograde precession. Is your head done in yet? Heck. Fun.
'Cause I have $30,000 in credit card debt. When they call, I tell them I can't pay it back yet. Credit card debt. Tomorrow I may buy myself a dining room set or this Boba Fett. Credit card debt, credit card debt, credit card debt. Oh my God, we are so random.
You're listening to the Pierrots and Fools Show on Critical Mass Radio. This is Mark Copping. Now it's our turn.
One to the sun, one to the morning, one to the one. One to the air and the freshness we breathe in. One to the force of the change in the seasons. One to the mother from which all things come. One to the daughters and one to the sons. One to the father who helps us believe that nothing's ever gonna harm you, seeing. One to the soldier who walks city swamps in. One to the soldier who fights over seasons. One to the man who gets down on his knees and prays for guidance and protection, pleasing. To the east, to the west, to the north and south, to the east, to the west. One love, people never gonna stop. To the east, to the west, to the north and south, to the east, to the west. One love, people never gonna stop. One to the woman, one to the man, one to the culture from the time when it began. One to destruction, one to birth, one to the people who still fight for the earth. One to the people who suffer for their needs, and one to the rebels who love rockin' to the beats, and one to the healer who fights the disease, and one to the Lorax who speaks for the trees. 'Cause no amount of money and no amount of man can bring back to life what's gone when it's done. And one to the people who rise with the sun, and one to the people who sleep when it's done. To the east, to the west, to the north and south, to the east, to the west. One love, people never gonna stop. To the east, to the west, to the north and south, to the east, to the west. One love, people never gonna stop. The whole thing seems upside down. The whole wide world keeps turning around. This whole thing seems upside down, but the whole wide world keeps turning around. Life is too short to make just one decision. Music's too large for just one station. Love is too big for just one nation, and God is too big for just one religion. One to the practice of being in the flow, and one to the tears of the things we let go, and one to the moment we live in right now, and one to the east, west, north, and south. To the east, to the west, to the north and south, to the east, to the west. One love, people never gonna stop. To the east, to the west, to the north and south, to the east, to the west. One love, people never gonna stop. Sing. This whole thing seems upside down, but the whole wide world keeps turning around. The whole thing seems upside down, but the whole wide world keeps turning around. The whole thing seems upside down, but the whole wide world keeps turning around. The whole thing seems upside down, but the whole wide world keeps turning around. The whole thing seems upside down, to the east, to the west, turning around. The whole thing seems upside down, the whole wide world keeps turning around.
Michael Franti and Spearhead, East to the West. I should say that next week, because I'm doing this, I'm going to move on and cover Saturn in quite a big way, and I'd like to try and do that next week. If this isn't boring you all, if it is, you know how to slap me. I have today posted on Facebook even, a note. You'll find it in my notes, but it's posted on the wall today, of links to every previous show that I've done from the beginning. And I'm very, very grateful to Guardian Angel. You know who you are, sir. Thank you very much. So that is there, and please spread it around, because it's kind of dawning on me that this is turning into some kind of work, and I need to cross-reference the shows, and I'll go back and now track them and give them titles and content and that sort of thing, because more and more people are wanting to listen to podcasts in their own time, which I guess is natural for something like this. So, I said last week, I also want to mention, other than Saturn, that I'm going to hopefully do an interview on Tuesday with the guy Archie I mentioned last week. Here's a guy who has Asperger's syndrome. He's a world adventurer, global adventurer, and has also spoken to a wolf for over 40 minutes. So you're going to have an interesting conversation there, if I can actually do that in time for the next show. Failing that, it will be the one after. So anyway, I did say last week, the four sides of the base of the pyramid are bent slightly inwards. As a result, the facings are slightly concave, and this represents concave sculpting of spinning discs. So that was a random throwaway last week. Now, since the base of the pyramid is nearly square and the ratio of the perimeter of the base to its height is equivalent to 2 pi, this implies the square of 2 pi. The square of 2 pi divided by pi cubed is 1.2732, the tangent of the slope angle of the pyramid. So I've said an awful lot because of Peter Plichter and other investigations into the numbers here. 2732 is a very relevant number. However, don't get it confused with the numbers, some of which are very similar. The one I'm on about is 2.72. All right, I've referenced that, and a lot of what I'm about to talk about references that also, as well as 2732. Don't get confused by the numbers. That's the whole point. Don't even worry about it. Kind of take these on board as facts, because when you listen back and check them, if you want to, you'll find that they are. And then you have a further question, and we'll get on to that, hopefully tonight, if I stop wittering. So it does appear that many things have been encoded around this planet in what you could call a topology matrix. One favourite thing that keeps cropping up in that is 19.47 degrees, the lower angle of the circular cone of graviton emission, and the latitude at which 3 non-polar corners of circumscribed tetrahedra just touch spinning spheres that circumscribe them. Now that sounds too headfucky for you. You can go and learn about this from Richard Hoagland. You can find out what this 19.47 degrees thing is, but basically it's saying that on any spinning sphere at that point there will be an energy upwelling, and that energy is coming in from the four-dimensional aspect of our reality, and it's caused by the spin. Essenes had used braided beams to push a dead planet from another galaxy to this galaxy, so that the dead planet could be reconfigured and placed in the appropriate orbit to become the moon of Danebury, Danebury's Earth. In order to be able to produce the proper environment for the evolution of self-aware life, Danebury needed to be given a retrograde precession of 25,920 years. And this was accomplished by replacing the reconfigured dead planet in a retrograde circular orbit around Danebury. Excuse me. An orbit having a radius of 221,546 Danebury miles. There's a bigger number than that, but I won't bother with all the decimal places unless they're important here. Essenes had determined this orbit by multiplying 25,920 times pi times 2.72069946, the transdimensional constant, equivalent to the square root of 3 divided by 2 times pi, the ratio of the surface area of a sphere to the tetrahedron it circumscribes. The period of revolution of the moon around Danebury was fixed at 27.2069946 days, 10 times the transdimensional constant. Both the orbit and the period of revolution of the moon of Danebury are now changing because Essenes have stopped keeping the moon in its previously required orbit. The period of the retrograde precession of Danebury is also changing as a result of the changing orbit of the moon, but it is no longer required that a retrograde precessional period of that number of years be maintained. The moons of seed planets are virtually unchanging and perfect for bringing forth life orbits, because they are there as a result of the physics of the universe. Essenes brought in a moon to make Danebury a seed planet, but Danebury's moon stayed in its required orbit only when that orbit was artificially maintained. Also important in producing the retrograde precessional period was the diameter, mass and angle of orbital inclination of the future moon. They determined the paradigm diameter of the moon of seed planets is 0.2732 times the size of the seed planet around which they orbit. Essenes also determined that the paradigm ratio between the mass of a seed planet and its moon is 81 to 1. 81, of course, being a key number in stuff I've talked about in previous shows, because if you put 1 over 81, you actually get the decimal number system, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, repeating. Finally, Essenes determined that the paradigm angle of orbital inclination of moons of seed planets to the equator of the seed planet is 5.1508 degrees, the result of dividing 114 by 0.2732 and by 81. The number 114 is the number of harmony. Essenes wanted the average diameter of the moon to be 2,160 Danebury miles, so they made it about 5 8/10 miles smaller than the paradigm diameter of the formula. They made the moon's mass slightly less than the paradigm, and its angle of orbital inclination slightly less than the paradigm, so that the total of 114 was still achieved. The spin rate of 10,000 revolutions a minute is a vital minimum spin rate, it being the lowest spin rate at which high-dimensional energy emanates from single spinning tetrahedra in opposing multi-cone patterns. It's been deduced from this discovery that a higher dimensional transformation takes place at 10,000 revs, during which the spinning tetrahedra reduplicate themselves into two interlocked tetrahedra, one of which is imaginary. More music, I think. Do you get the idea sometimes that history is repeating? Yeah? There you go.
What is about? There's something evolving. Whatever may come, the world keeps revolving. They say the next big thing is here, that the revolution's near. But to me it seems quite clear that it's all just a little bit of history repeating.
right now, with our sun, the average surface temperature on Earth, hot places and cold places in different seasons all considered, is an arguably comfortable 14 to 15 degrees Celsius. Without the sun to add energy, the Earth would radiate away heat exponentially, meaning it would go fast at first and then happen more and more slowly. By the end of the first week without the sun, the average surface temperature across Earth would be freezing, 0 Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, temperatures like this happen all the time on Earth. We're used to it. Panic and fear and looters and anarchy aside, for the first few days or months, we could get by. But by the end of the first year without the sun, the average global surface temperature would be negative 73 degrees Celsius, negative 100 Fahrenheit. The best option, really, would be to move to geothermal areas like Yellowstone or Iceland. These places would be the few safe havens for human life after the sun. Nearly all life on Earth exists because of and is dependent upon extraterrestrial energy, the sun. But the Earth produces its own heat. Despite floating in the coldness of space for billions of years, down below the crust, the Earth is quite warm. 20% of this warmth came from the fact that when the Earth formed, mass crushed so tightly in the middle that the pressure liquefied rock. The other 80% of Earth's internal heat comes from the fact that deep in its core, radioactive elements decay, providing the energy needed to keep the Earth's core at 5,000 degrees Celsius. Anyone who failed to secure a position within one of these bastions of warmth, or perhaps underground in a community warmed and powered by nuclear fuel, would likely be dead within the first year of no sun. In the next 10 or 20 years, things would start to get wet with dew, but not with glorious water droplets, instead droplets of liquid air. The air would literally become cold enough for the gases that make it up to condense or form clouds and precipitate, first as rain and then as it got colder and colder, eventually as snow. In Fritz Leiber's famous science fiction short story, A Pail of Air, this has already happened. The Earth was ripped away from the sun, and in order to survive, a family must go outdoors in a special suit and scoop up a pail of just the oxygen snow, bring it back in, and place it over a fire to warm and allow them to breathe. A year or so after the sun disappeared, Earth's oceans will have frozen over, ice all the way across. But ice is less dense than liquid water, which means that ice floats. And ice is a pretty decent insulator. So, for billions of years after the sun disappeared, liquid water could still exist at the bottom of our oceans, protected and insulated from space by miles of ice above it, and warmed by vents on the ocean floor that spew water out, superheated by Earth's interior. This would continue on Earth for a very, very long time, sun or no sun. Instead of becoming frozen and lifeless, extremophiles, like microbes that live around hydrothermal vents deep in the ocean, would be fine. They live deep in the ocean, far below the point where sunlight can penetrate, and they make energy not through photosynthesis, but via chemosynthesis, converting heat and methane and sulfur into the energy they need. They are then eaten by clams and tube worms. Extremophiles deposit minerals back into the vents, meaning that their food chain is complete. It's a circle. It's independent of the sun. Earthlings like them would thrive if the sun were to disappear. They would live just fine without ever knowing that the sun was gone, or honestly, without ever even knowing it existed in the first place. It's amazing to think that life, here on Earth, all alone, flying through space with no sun, would kind of be fine. Far from becoming a frozen dead rock or a boring dormant seed, the Earth would be a spaceship carrying living passengers with enough geothermal heat for billions of years of life. If the sun disappeared, spaceship Earth would fly out in a straight line, covering about 30 kilometers every single second. After just 1 billion years, it will have covered 900 quadrillion kilometers, or about 100,000 light years, a trip that could potentially take it all the way across our galaxy, near thousands of stars, and nothing's to say it couldn't fall into orbit around one, thaw out, and allow its still living extremophiles to proliferate life on Earth all over again. Maybe one day developing life intelligent enough to uncover whatever is left of our lives.
Critical Mass Radio. So thanks to Vsauce there. Also Numberphile. And gosh, they always give you the links. Do go and listen to Vsauce on YouTube and pass them on. Kind of nicking their material. Don't sue me, lads, because they're brilliant. Everyone should kind of listen. There's loads to learn, and it's fascinating. Kind of don't want to sound silly and excited here. For those who haven't realised, the stuff I'm talking about is, by coincidence or otherwise, the interlocked tetrahedra model as proposed by Richard Hoagland, and that's why I suggest you go and look at it, because the geometry is based on the squaring of the circle, creating a square inside a circle, which has the same perimeter as the circle's circumference. The diameter of the squared circle is 1.2732 times the length of any given side of the square which squares it. And you wonder why Freemasons are interested in squaring the circle. And you wonder why Freemasons' heads explode when you show them this kind of thing. But this kind of thing has actually been around for 20 plus years, so it's there. That's the point. As ever, this is kind of been missed by so many people, and I can understand why, but that perspective will unfold as I go further. But if you have missed this perspective, you can perhaps take some lack of comfort in the fact that the BBC News and Current Affairs said in 1990, I think it was absolutely mind-blowing, Aviation Informatics said it's linked to sacred geometry, physics and mathematics to mankind's origin, and space exploration is brilliant. It's also hinted with a capital H that these are the NASA whistleblowers. Yet this element of the story seems to have been kind of overlooked and shunted to one side. And I think there's a reason for that. So I'm just talking about it, and we'll see how the numbers pan out for you. The harmonics of music, which are both mathematical and pleasing to the ear, are the only thing in 3 dimensions which can bring both the creative and linear halves of the self-aware mind into harmony. The harmonics of music do this because they devolve from the higher order hyperdimensional harmonics which control the universe. The moon of Earth is in a retrograde orbit and thereby caused the previously required 25,920-year retrograde precession. When the moon was causing this retrograde precession, Earth rotated in precisely 23 hours 56 minutes, and the moon was directly overhead the meridian of any given location exactly 59 and 5/6 minutes later each day, giving the moon an apparent orbital period of 24 hours 55 and 5/6 minutes. The ratio between 23 hours 56 minutes and 24 hours 55 and 5/6 minutes is precisely 24/25, the harmonic of the universe. Thus, the ratio between the length of the period of rotation of Earth and the apparent orbital period of its moon was the primary factor in the establishment of the retrograde precession period, and more importantly, this ratio, equivalent to 24/25, was the primary factor in setting up the harmonics by which self-aware life could evolve on Earth. Both the orbit and the period of revolution of the moon are now changing because Essenes have stopped keeping the moon in its previously required orbit. However, it is no longer required that a retrograde precessional period be maintained. That raises an interesting question. Oh, we're so going to fall into Avebury and Stonehenge and stuff. But it's a long story, and I do want it to unfold. So, skipping into it, and again quite randomly in a way for you, for those who are interested in channeling and the Pleiadians and so on. The Pleiadian, who was emperor at the time, hated the American Revolution, a revolution carried through to the successful implementation of forward-looking republics by visionaries who were heirs to the civilization of the Hellenes. They knew the Hermetic teachings, understood the ways of those who had preceded them in America, and had great hopes for a better future for everyone. To counterbalance the American Revolution, secret Pleiadian agents operated from the land of the damned, enticed promising beings in France to corrupt the French Revolution and to turn the French from their ideals of fraternity, equality and liberty towards envious class hatred and stubborn nationalism. The most promising of the beings enticed by the secret Pleiadian agent was Napoleon Bonaparte, whose forces shot the nose off of the Arcure, the replacement nose which had been attached to the Arcure by the Egyptians. Less than 30 years later, secret Pleiadian agents based in the land of the damned enticed promising beings who subsequently caused the Beastling of the south to invade the land of the damned. When the Beastling's army was severely routed by the Hellenes, the Beast of the north was forced to intervene on behalf of the Beastlings of the south. You can see where this is going maybe, or maybe it's just confusing you. I hope not. I just want to skip that bit though, because we're basically going to have a rundown of the Sudan conflict there, and a bit of talk about fossil fuels and how they're being used. But the Pleiadian emperor, it goes on to explain, with detail I can't be bothered with at the moment, that they created a savage virus specifically designed to attack those who are most harmonic among human beings. Along the way, getting back to the flight of the Essenes, or the trip, they were frustrated by the fact that helping human beings was prohibited, so they used all their wits to circumvent this prohibition under the guise of such informants as Hermes Trismegistus, infused many very important things about the universe into society. And although this information has remained mostly intact, secret societies have continued to keep the majority of it from most human beings. Diverse priesthoods working in conjunction with various rulers have used bits of this vital information to bring fear and subjugation to most human beings. Essenes are being appalled by the greed and thirst for power of this multifarious priesthoods and rulers, and they came to understand that their circumventing of the mandate of the source of the universe caused matters to worsen among human beings. They therefore stopped and waited for that mandate to allow them to proceed further. When they were allowed to proceed, they had learned a valuable lesson. They gave the information not to the priests and the kings, but directly to the people. And from there we might even stroll into crop circles. But I want to play a song called The Ballad of Cursed Anna by Jonathan Kelly. 1969, I think. I played this months ago to a tiny truth seeker out there, diminutive not. She loved it. So this is for the tiny truth seeker, or whatever you want to call yourself. But The Ballad of Cursed Anna, great song. Enjoy.
I was walking homeward in the early morning light, leaving far behind the prison where I'd spent the night, with no idea what I'd done or why they'd punished me, but feeling nonetheless relieved and grateful to be free. Path led to a woodland far behind a rusted gate. I knew it was a shortcut if I kept my walking straight. But then, like out of nowhere, this old wizened man appeared holding high his one hand while the other stroked his beard. Beware the cursed Anastair, this warning did he bring, that no one makes it through this wood, coming out as they went in. But a change is what I'm looking for, I told the sad old man, and bidding him a last farewell into the wood I ran. Soon I came to a river where I stopped to bathe my feet, and that was when I smelled her perfume, delicate and sweet. I stood up and turned around, and there in front of me stood a beautiful woman who simply stared at me. And then I knew it was all true what the old man had advised. You must be Anna, I said as I looked into her eyes. Beware the curse that Anna stares, this warning did he bring, that no one makes it through this wood, coming out as they went in. Together in a passionate embrace, I felt my body weaken and my heart begin to race. And when at last the kissing stopped, I saw to my alarm, this woman now had changed into a young girl in my arms. I heard her childish laughter, saw her vanish through the trees. I turned back to the river, my reflection for to see. And there inside the water I saw exactly as I feared. To my horror I turned into an old man with a beard. Beware the curse that Anna stares, this warning did he bring, that no one makes it through this wood, coming out as they went in. 7 long years I've waited by this gate, wishing I could die. But that can only happen if some other young man comes by. First I know I must warn him to go some other way, but hope that like most men of that age, he won't believe what old men say. To beware the curse that Anna stares, this warning do I bring, for no one makes it through this wood, coming out as they went in.
The Ballad of Cursed Anna by Jonathan Kelly from his album Twice Around the Houses. Excellent album. I love it. I said just before that the Essenes were frustrated by the fact that helping human beings directly was prohibited, and that they did so, and it kind of messed up. So what did they do? Well, they were allowed, according to this, to counter the effects of Pleiadian savagery, but only in ways that would not be discerned by humans. Essenes understood what human beings had understood along the way, and presented human beings with things which were just beyond their ability to comprehend. Human beings in ancient times saw flying craft which looked like birds. Later, human beings saw flying objects, then flying saucers, which changed as technology advanced. The UFOs of the 1990s appear very different to the flying saucers of the 1950s. Over 1,000 years before the time the psychopath Akhenaten, a blowhard named Cheops, became pharaoh of Egypt, even though it was widely known that the pyramid called Hermer in this paper was already there when the Egyptians first settled around the bastion. The bragger Cheops insisted that he had built the Great Pyramid, and everyone knew this wasn't true, because no one even knew how to get inside it, not even him. After the passing of Cheops, another came, Chephren. Even though everyone knew that the Ark-Hur was already there when the Egyptians first settled around the bastion, Chephren insisted he had sculpted the great Sphinx of Chephren. And to prove his point, he added his long nose to the long-since noseless Ark-Hur. Chephren also identified himself with the bridge of the bastion, now known as the Pyramid of Khephren. The scenes had been appalled, the Egyptologist, clearly recognizing that the pyramid is the oldest and most finely constructed one, can still say that it was the beginning of a brief architectural fad. So on that point, I think I would leave it and say good night and thank you for joining me. And men grow old, but somehow increase in strength, yet still retain an aspect of childishness that impels them to love a world rich in monumental dearth, embellished by yet greater fools, who use advanced but rustic tools to build to mammon and to man, and to diverse gods that still remain in evolution's plan. No panacea for a sickening brain. Those who fear remain the same.